Hey guys, so before we begin with the video, this is yet another creepypasta reading that I decided to do during Horror October because while I was thinking of making another gameplay of yet another indie horror game for the Horror October series, I decided why not I do a long creepypasta reading. And assuming you already read the title, or if you haven't, yesterday we're going to be doing the creepypasta reading of the infamous or the most famous one, Godzilla NES or NES Godzilla, whatever you of course choose to name it. And the reason why I decided to do a creepypasta reading or this type of creepypasta reading is because next week, or at least from tomorrow until next week, I'll be busy with my father. We'll be abroad. We'll be working abroad because spending time with father and that kind of stuff. And I may be busy with that and not be able to have enough time to record something else or to upload another video. But because this creepypasta reading is split into 8 different chapters along with an epilogue at the end, shut up phone, please. That way, I'll be occupied with absolutely this. So, yeah, that's basically the reason why I decided to do this type of creepypasta reading. So, yeah, nothing else to say, just enjoy the reading. When I was a little kid, the two things I loved most in life was Godzilla and NES games. So naturally, when Godzilla Monster of Monsters came out, it was like a dream come true. Well, almost. To sum it up, most of the game revolved around getting through very repetitive outer space levels while smashing up tanks, jets, and then fighting against Godzilla's monster enemies. Overall, it was pretty mediocre, but back then I didn't care. When I got the game as a present for my 10th birthday, I played it night and day as much as I could. Unfortunately, I had traded the game for Amazon a year later, much to my regret when I found out what that game was like. Recently, I had bought a new NES system, and through a lot of hunting and nesting around, my friend Billy finally managed to find a copy of Godzilla Monster of Monsters. I was pumped to play my favorite childhood game. It never even occurred to me to ask where Billy found it. He also gave me some other games like Legend of Zelda, Bomberman, and some stupid thing called Action 52, but Godzilla had to come first. So I started the game, and the nostalgia came floating back like a tidal wave. Godzilla's 8-beat theme song floated proudly into the speakers, and I was soon grinning like an idiot. Some people laugh at me for playing such outdated games, but I've never had as much enjoyment for any game other than those on the NES. Those 8-bit games take me back to when things were much simpler, more safe. But after what happened with this game, I don't have those feelings anymore. I have forgotten how quick the fun of smashing things as Godzilla wore off in the scrolling levels. The game bombards you with bullets and things crashing into you from every direction, and you're too big to avoid most of them. Although my excitement had worn down some, it wasn't long at all before I got my first boss battle. My first opponent was Godzilla, an obscure squid kaiju who had never been in a Godzilla movie. The most annoying thing about fighting Godzilla is that he always backs you into a corner and stands smacking you with his tentacle, and you are unable to move until he gets off you. This move doesn't do any damage, but it can stall you until the timer runs out and you have to start the fight over and regain some health. It's as annoying as it sounds. And of course, he did it when I fought. Only for some reason, this caused the game to glitch up, because once he started smacking me, he never stopped. The timer is supposed to end the fight in about 40 seconds, but this lasted for nearly 5 minutes. After a while, the graphics started to mess up with little red blobs all over the place, which was weird. But I just took the game out, blew on it, and then started again. I wasn't about to let a little glitch stand in my way, so I started the game, and this time defeated Godzilla and the level's other boss monster, Maguera, without any problems. So then it was on to the next planet, Mars. I bounced around the board and found something unexpected. Where Varan's piece should have been, there was instead a piece representing Titanosaurus. There were only 10 kaiju in the game, and Titanosaurus was not one of them. Or so I thought. Perhaps Titanosaurus was originally intended to be in the game but was swept out with around for some reason. So I began to feel very excited. Not only was I playing my favorite game, but I was playing a prototype of some sort with a new monster. Needless to say, I ran through the levels as fast as I could to see Titanosaurus in action. Fought Godzilla again, and beat him before he could do his tentacle smack, but this time the glitch started happening when he died. Godzilla's pride didn't sink to the bottom, but instead seemed to be devoured by the glitch, and his eyes started randomly spawning all over the screen. I know now that these glitches with Godzilla were my first warning sign that something was very wrong with this game. But foolishly, I ignored it, and proceeded on to fight Maguire, who this time had a glitch of his own. Maguire was twice the size he should have been, which startled me. He was also considerably harder to beat than usual, which is to say not at all, but soon I had defeated him also, and when he died, yet another glitch happened. This happened extremely fast, so I was lucky to get a screen cap of it all, but what happened was that the giant Maguire sprite started to shatter and melt. Also, if you look at the garble text at the right corner of the screen, you will notice what appears to be a button in a cage. I still have no idea what that meant. At this point, I was about to fight the Titanosaurus, and I was worried as to what kind of glitches would happen this time. But to my surprise, Titanosaurus looked just fine. Although all of the game's bipedal monsters were the same height, Titanosaurus was a bit taller. But since Titanosaurus actually was taller than Godzilla in his film's debut, I thought that was kinda cool. After a very fun fight with a monster that wasn't supposed to be in the game, I took over the enemy base and proceeded not to Jupiter like normal, but instead to Pharos. Pharos was the same as Jupiter in layout, except the board was dark blue rather than green. The first thing I noticed was that all the usual level icons had been replaced by a blue rock in some kind of orange honeycomb shape. There was one icon that had part of the jungle icon shape, but I didn't pay much thought to it. I checked the other side of the board to see the new monster. Instead of Ghidorah, it was Biolante. But that could have been right. Godzilla vs. Biolante didn't come out until 1989, and this game was made 1988. Perhaps Toho put Biolante in the game to build excitement for the movie next year, but changed their minds. I tried to rationalize the game's abnormalities any way I could, but this would prove to be futile. Fattest Map song was the first new song I heard in the game. Like most of the new songs, it was hard to describe. I'll try. It started out slow and suspenseful, much slower than any song in the game. But every 12 seconds or so, there would be a loud clashing sound and the tempo changed. It was like the composer randomly played parts from 5 different songs with the same instruments. I moved Godzilla over to one of the many blue rock icons that had replaced the jungle icons and started the level. The level resembled the blue mountain range with the blood-red planets in the sky. But there was something odd about the mon. They had a shredded paper look to them. I thought at first maybe the glitch had affected them, but it looked far too intentional. I quickly noticed something else about this new level. There were no enemies at all, not even any obstacles. I should also mention that this was where the point meter started to become glitched beyond comprehension. But it didn't bother me much. I never keep up with game points. So without having to focus on anything, I listened to the music while walking through to the level unopposed. The music had a soulful feel to it. It would have been rather pleasant had I heard it in a normal game. The level went on for 3 screens, but with no obstacles around, I finished it very quickly. I tried other levels of the same type to see if any enemies appear, but there were none. There was a little else to be seen in the Blue Mountains, so I tried the other level type. I started one of the orange levels and my eyes were assaulted with a grotesque background of tumultuous orange eyes. The sky was the same as the ground, so I assumed the game was indicating that this level takes place in a cave. The only enemies here were Mantangle spawn, but as you can see, the little bastards were everywhere. The music certainly didn't help, with a mixture of screeching sounds and loud drum beats that sounded like a monster's theme in a horror film. After completing it, I tried to avoid playing through any more of these levels whenever I could. The map was short, so it was only a few minutes before I was headed towards a rematch with Godzilla and Maguire. But this time, the sprites and attack patterns were vastly different. I fought Maguire first. Maguire's replacement was a flying machine with a slight resemblance to the Cobra alien. It was a bit like fighting Mothra, only it moved with a lot more grace. It attacked by spinning its front tentacle like a corkscrew, and it still had an eye beam, except now it fired from the drill. The slanky aberration had replaced Godzilla, and the new beast was more of a challenge. It would run and jump at a fast pace, constantly swinging its arms around, making it hard to get close, and of course, it tried to pin me in the corner with as much annoying resolve as ever. I defeated it using a combination of tail whips and heat beam spamming. I defeated him and was going to fight Titanosaurus, but when I started the fight, Titanosaurus was nowhere to be seen, and the game simply went back to the map with the Titanosaurus beast now missing. There was no one left to fight now, but Biolante, so I eagerly started the battle. I was quite surprised that Biolante started the fight in her rose form. She was an immobile and used tentacles to keep me away from the main body, which took the most damage. As expected, she turned into her final form after taking enough damage. The sprite looked pretty damn good for 8-bit. The battle technique was the same, except now Biolante could move, albeit slower than any other monster. Being hit by the tentacles did more damage now, and Biolante could do an acid spit, which I managed to avoid by jumping in the screen cap. Not much more difficult to beat than Titanosaurus, it only took 2 rounds. But when Biolante was gone, the music had stopped, and there was a new icon replacing the base. The icon wasn't there before I beat Biolante. It resembled a red tribal mask, and I had a feeling of dread when I saw it. But since it's replaced the base, it must be the only way to exit battles. I moved Godzilla to the square and started the level. It was a hellish looking place with no sky and a flickering fire in the background. The fire looked far more advanced than anything I've seen on the NES. There was music in the form of a slow, steady drum sound resembling a heartbeat. All the text on the top of the screen and the life bar were gone. In their place was a single bit of text in the middle of the screen that said, "Run." My feeling of dread had intensified. I cautiously walked through the level, but like the Blue Mountains, there were no enemies. I paced around for a minute before thinking, run? From what? The first time it hit me, I didn't even see it. I heard a noise outside my room and turned back to see if something fell, and when I looked back, Godzilla was dying. I figured it must have been just a glitch, but I wasn't going to play through the game without Godzilla, so I restarted the game and went to the password screen. Have I ever mentioned how creepy the password screen music is? If you play the game, you know what I mean. It doesn't fit the mood of the game at all. It's more like something from a horror game. Maybe they made it like that so kids wouldn't cheat. I was quite annoyed at this point because I thought I was going to have to fight all the monsters again, but that didn't happen. The game started me off right where I was before I started the red face level, so I tried again, making sure to pay attention this time. That's when I heard the lowing sound, and then I saw it. this thing. Do you know the feeling your body has when you feel like you're in extreme danger? You start to recoil and tense up as the adrenaline flows through your veins, and your nerves start to feel very cold. That's the feeling I had when I took the screen cap. I haven't seen all the Godzilla moves, but I'm pretty damn sure this was never in any of them. It had to be something the creators made up. But what kind of sick fuck would put this in a children's game? By sheer dumb luck or perhaps the adrenaline boost, I managed to run fast enough to get away from it. It ran very fast, so much that if you saw it, you were almost certainly going to die. And when I say die, I mean your monster gets killed instantly if the creature touches them. Once I had gone back to the map, I was so afraid. I was extremely tempted to just shut the game off and try to pretend this never happened. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. It couldn't be real. And even if I wanted to continue, I still had to get Mothra to this chase level. But as I stayed inactive on the map screen for a few minutes, my fear was replaced by burning curiosity. What the hell had just happened? What was the rest of the game like? I only had to beat this level with Mothra and then it was on to the next world. But when I moved Mothra to the red face, the game registered it as me beating the level. I was quite relieved. I tried to prepare myself for the next world. Trance. I was still pretty shook up from the last level when I started Trance. Trance map music did nothing to ease the tension. As for how to describe it, have you ever heard the theme from Videodrome? That's the closest thing I can think of it to compare it to. I checked to see who the new monster was, and it was Org, a monster who didn't make its film debut until 2000, appearing in a game made in 1988. So much for my theories about Titanosaurus and Biolante. There's no way this game was made in 1988. Those guys at Toho may be smart, but I'm sure they can see that far in the future. If they could, they never would have given Roland Emmerich the rights to make a Godzilla movie. No, this had to be a hack of some kind, which just opened up even more questions. Who made this hack? When? How? And most importantly, why? The why was the question that bothered me the most. My immediate assumption was to think Billy did this to pull a joke on me, but that couldn't be right either. Billy didn't know how to make a ROM hack. And if he did, he'd probably just do something simple and stupid like replacing all the monsters with crudely drawn genitalia. Unless Billy had amazing game editing skills and a serious dark streak to his imagination that he never told me about, he couldn't have made it. Is it even possible to put a hacked ROM into a cartridge? Aside from all that, my eye was drawn to a new icon on the map. A question mark. I was really curious as to what I did. I'm sure you're also curious, so I'll explain the quiz levels now, since this was when they start appearing. There was one of these per map from here on, and they always appeared near the start of the map. When you start on a quiz level, you appear on a screen like this. As you can see, there's a question at the top, a yes and no button, and an emoticon in the center. I refer to the emoticon as face. Real creative, I know. And for convenience, I will refer to face as the one asking the questions. The music for the quiz levels was the track actually in the game. It's the one that plays when you try to use the GH1D aura cheat and get sent to an unplayable level. Face asks you 12 yes or no questions, and you move your monsters to the buttons for your answer. When you answer, the question disappears, and face changes expression for about 8 seconds. Then it goes back to neutral, and a new question comes up. There was no time limit, nor any right or wrong answers. Face has no respect for the player's personal boundaries and will sometimes ask deeply disturbing and personal questions. For example, do you like hurting people? Have you ever killed/raped anyone? Have you ever been molested by a family member? Other times he would ask questions that were either mind-numbingly stupid, is the sun hot, is the water wet, or just flat out ridiculous. Does your dog like the president? And maybe once per quiz, Faith would ask you a question about the game. With one exception, Faith's expression changes seem to have no effect on the game, except for indicating what the game creator thought of your answer. His reactions rarely made any sense, and at first I thought they were randomly generated. The questions never followed a pattern. Faith never stayed on the same subject for more than 2 seconds into questions. Early on, there are questions that make me think Faith was building up to something, only to then ask some stupid garbage. Here are the expressions of Faith that I saw while playing. I'll separate them in 2 categories: the expressions I understood and the expressions I didn't. First are the expressions I understood. Number 1, neutral, is default expression. Number 2, angry. If you try to attack Faith, expression changes to this, but nothing else happens. Number 3, sad. Number 4, happy. Number 5, sick. Number 6, maniacal. Faith made this expression when he was being an asshole. You'll see what I mean later. Number 7, surprise. Number 8, love. Number 9, annoyed. Number 10, confused. Number 11, guilty/hurt. And here are the others. 2 of these only appeared once, numbers 1 and number 12, and I suspected they might have been in-jokes from the creator. Their respective questions were, do you like ice cream? And are you a tough guy? As for the questions in the first quiz, luckily I had a notepad and pen handy. I have problems with remembering things, so I often carry one around to jot things down, and sometimes I doodle in it when I'm bored. So when the first quiz started, I thought I'd record what happened, and I'm glad I did. Here were the first series of questions, my answers, and Faith's reaction. Quiz 1. Question number 1. Do you like the game? Answer: yes. Reaction: happy. Question number 2. Are you afraid? Answer: yes. Reaction: surprised. Question number 3. Are you over 18? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 5. Question number 4. Do birds have teeth? Answer: no. Reaction: love. Question number 5. Is peanut butter good? Answer: no. Reaction: sick. Question number 6. Does the moon rotate? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 11. Have you had a job? Answer: yes. Reaction: confused. Do you like hurting people? Answer: no. Reaction: annoyed. Is the sun hot? Answer: yes. Reaction: sad. Do you like dogs? Answer: yes. Reaction: happy. Is the president good? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 3. Does your dog like the president? Answer: no. Reaction: angry. Now that I've explained all that, time for the gameplay. After the quiz level, I tried the new green temple icon first. Wow. Maybe this is why the game was so weird. One of the designers was clearly drugged out of his mind. Jokes aside, I was quite impressed by the graphics of this level, as disorienting as they were, but I hate those creepy blank staring statue faces. The music had a hypnotic Indian techno vibe to it. There were 2 new enemies in this level. A flying ghost type thing with a trunk and a bat, with a horse skull for a face. They appear at random, but I was lucky to get a screen cap of them both. Then I proceeded to a blue mountain level, expecting another nice, calm stroll. I took my time walking through, and was completely taken by surprise when this happened. Not Magera came speeding towards me and took off quite a bit of health with his tentacle screws. It only took me 2 minutes to kill him without having to worry about a time limit, but the boss monsters never showed up in the scoring levels in the normal game. I was worried as to what other rules this game would break. After another Blue Mountain stage, it was time to find Not Varan, whose replacement was one of the most bizarre things in this game. The strange creature attacks you by kicking, and also opening up his chest and firing heat-seeking missiles. I still don't get it. The missiles was something a pain to deal with, but I found out you could tail whip them out of the way. Not Varan was probably the easiest of the monster replacements. The same could not be said for Not Hedorah. Apparently, the source of the host paths, Not Hedorah, was the most aggravatingly difficult monsters to fight yet. Mostly because of his special ability. He could shriek and summon a small swarm of those host bad things. I know there's only 2 in the screen cap, but every time he did this, about 10 would arrive. The AI took advantage of the distraction and attacked twice as fast while the host pads were flying around. Once that annoyance was over with, I went through a green temple level to kill some enemies to restore my health. Interestingly, none of the host pads showed up after Not Hedorah was killed. And that was when I got an idea. If killing all the monsters made the red face show up, what would happen if I avoid fighting Orga and go straight to the base? So I gave that a try. The game told me there was no monster there when I tried to start the base level, and immediately afterward, the game took control of my Godzilla piece and moved it in front of Orga. My little trick didn't work, so I tried to prepare myself for another chase. But first, I had to beat Orga. The fight with Orga confirmed another thing. Whoever created this game hack was clearly a Godzilla fan. Not only because they picked a monster like Orga, but because they actually implemented something that happened in Godzilla 2000 in a really neat way. Orga's primary attacks were a punch and a heat beam from his shoulder cavity, but once he had gotten down to half his health, he did something new. He would expand his jaws and try to swallow Godzilla, in the process stealing your health and energy. But in doing so, he gave himself a new weakness. Firing a heat beam into his mouth would take a devastating 4 bars of his life meter. With that weakness revealed, I soon beat Orga, and despite how much I had hoped otherwise, the red face appeared on the map where the base was, and the music stopped. I readied myself as best as I could. I started the level, and seeing that it was basically the same as the first, I didn't waste a millisecond before I started hauling ass. I soon encountered obstacles in the form of the ground tile suspended in the air. Most of them you can jump over or destroy, others you have to crouch under. About 40 seconds into it, I heard the horrible bellowing roar and saw the spider beast falling close behind me. Stacks of obstacles barely slow it down. It would back up and then charge its way through them, smashing them into bits. And when the smaller obstacles got in its way, it would expand its jaws and swallow them whole. I was afraid. But with fast thinking and faster button pressing, I escaped him yet again. I felt really excited, and so I laughed and said, "Not this time, asshole." I decided to take a screen capture to celebrate. But when I said that sentence, just before the level ended, the monster did something that made my blood run cold. It looked at me. That wave of mortal terror overtook me again, and I sure as hell wasn't laughing anymore. I took another screen cap of the next level title right before I rushed to the bathroom to splash some water on my face, and to take a piss that I nearly failed to contain when that fucking thing looked at me. When I got back to the game, I was getting very upset and confused. I thought about the way the monster looked at me. The game couldn't have heard what I said. That's impossible. It had to be a random occurrence, but why did it happen precisely at the moment I insulted the monster? Nothing about this game made any sense. The new Godzilla monsters, the weird replacement monsters, out of place imagery like the green temples, quiz levels, and the red monster chases. It didn't seem to add up in any kind of meaningful way. If it was a prank, it wasn't funny in any way I could understand, and I clearly put far too much effort into it. If they were trying to make a genuine sequel with new Godzilla monsters, then why did they add everything else? Maybe it was some kind of art experiment, some group project made by a bunch of really talented and crazy people and they lost the cartridge somehow. Or maybe they intended for some random person to find it. It was all just fruitless guessing. As far as I could tell, there was only one way to figure out what the deal with this game was. To play it through to the end. Maybe, just maybe, there will be something in the credits, an explanation by the creators as to why they made this. Or it could be something much more cryptic and strange, maybe even something horrifying. Before I got a good look at the dimension board, I considered replaying Trans to see if the red monster would look at me again, but I decided against it. I wanted to keep moving forward. I was also somewhat worried that backtracking might cause the game to become even more strange. The dimension board music sounded a lot like this Saturn music, except it was slowed down and playing with a piano-sounding instrument. Like most of these new map themes, it had a dangerous, suspenseful feel. While listening to the music, I looked at the dimension board. There were 4 boss monsters this time: Space Godzilla, Manda, Gigan, and Baragon. I was surprised that there were 2 new telco monsters this time, but the best surprise was still to come. I started a quiz level. Here's another list of results in the same format as the last one. Quiz 2. Question number 1. Can you swim? Answer: yes. Reaction: happy. 2. Do you like fish? Answer: yes. Reaction: sad. 3. Can penguins fly? Answer: no. Reaction: sad. 4. Can it spin in all directions? There was no clarification of what Face meant by it, so I just guessed. Answer: no. Reaction: surprised. Do you breathe oxygen? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 8. Does it taste good when you bite a woman? I don't know who came up with this question, but I really hope they're getting mental help. Answer: no. Reaction: annoyed. Is the night where you are? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 6. Do you like cats? Answer: yes. Reaction: confused. Is water wet? Answer: yes. Reaction: angry. Have you ever broken a bone? Answer: no. Reaction: happy. Do you like your job? Answer: yes. Reaction: hurt. Would you like a new monster? Answer: yes. Reaction: wait for phase number 11. I wasn't entirely sure at the time what phase meant by new monster, but I couldn't resist answering yes, just to see what would happen. The result was mind-blowing. The game took me back to the board, and I had a new playable monster in the form of Anguirus. Ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to play as Anguirus, since he was my second favorite Godzilla monster, and plus I never liked Mothra all that much. I moved my new Anguirus piece over to the level right next to it, eager to test out my new monster. Before I got into the level description, I'll talk about Anguirus a bit. Using the up and down buttons, you could choose whether Anguirus stood in a bipedal stance or crawled around on all fours. It wasn't a huge difference, but being able to stand was helpful in boss fights, and crawling sometimes helped dodge obstacles and attacks. He could punch and kick like Godzilla, but no tail whip. Instead, he had something far more interesting: the ability to curl up into a spiked ball of death and roll around. You could still take damage, but it was lessened. It was a good way of clearing out stage enemies, but unfortunately, doing this also drained the power ball. But the spike ball wasn't his only special ability. When you pressed start, he would fire a beam of energy from his mouth. It resembled Titanosaurus' sonar attack, and if this were a hack, it may have been inspired by the roar attack from Atari's Godzilla fighting games. Also of note is that when playing as Anguirus, the level meter gets glitched up. Judging by the life and power bar, I'd say he's on level 10. Now onto the level. As you might have guessed from the level icon, these levels are green palette swaps of the ground and background tiles from the Blue Mountains. But what immediately caught my attention was the water, which has a transparency effect. Was that even possible for a NES game? I know the Super Nintendo could do it, but I had never seen a transparency effect in a game on a NES. The Green Mountains music was played with the same instrument as the Blue Mountains, but the melody was totally different. It was a very simple song with a lot of abrupt pauses, followed by a loud note every few seconds. Anyway, I went through the usual sorting through the level. And again, there were no monsters or anything. But pretty soon I had reached a cliff above the water. There was nothing to go but into the water, so down I went. The water transparency made things a bit harder to see, but it's tolerable. After going underwater, I encountered two new enemies, a giant piranha and some kind of spiky bottom feeder thing. I liked the piranha because I could easily tell what it was. It was the same enemy design that would appear in a real game, and there were very few enemies like this. They didn't take much hits to kill, but they were quite annoying and could considerably trim down your life if they got close enough. They also tend to travel in packs. As for the bottom feeders, they're easy to deal with. They swing along the bottom of the screen towards you and are easily crushed with a roll attack or jumped over. In this screen cap, you can see me about to run one of them over, and there's a pack of piranha behind it. After I beat the level, I moved Godzilla onto the blue castle icon. I started the level, and I got a title screen with the text, "Unforgiving Cold." The level itself looked like a castle dungeon made of blue bricks with rows of identical white statue faces on the walls. These statue faces had a permanent look of horror on their faces. There was also something there was also some flickering gray static, which didn't really obscure my vision, but it adds to the very unsettling mood of these levels. The music was a 12-second loop of a low-pitched choir vocalizing that sounded very familiar to me. Whenever I played through one of those levels, I got this sudden horrible feeling of anxiety. I had the feeling that the farther I progressed through the level, the closer I was getting to something unspeakably evil. There weren't any enemies, but these were some of the longest levels in the game. I only played one level, but it took 7 minutes to complete. I didn't want to admit it to myself at the time, but I realized something playing the Blue Castle level. This game has the power to make the player feel certain things. I don't mean in the sense that you get irritated by playing a crappy game or get unnerved by something scary in a game. What I mean is that certain events in this game can instantly make you start feeling something. I know that sounds completely insane. I don't blame you if you're not believing me. I wouldn't believe any of this either if I didn't play the game myself. But there's something very, very wrong with this game, and I still don't know how to explain it. So then it was time to fight Baragon's replacement. Although Baragon was originally the smallest monster in the game, his replacement was the largest. It was so tall, in fact, that the ground was noticeably lowered and not Baragon's head still barely avoided collision with the bar at the top of the screen. And he was just as frighteningly bizarre as he was huge. You may be wondering how he attacks without arms. Well, he has the most powerful kick in the game, but his other fighting technique is much stranger. First, he blasts a cloudy breath of pixels down at you, which causes you to freeze. Then he walks back to the right corner of the screen and extends a huge Gatling gun from his abdomen. That might seem amusing to you, but it certainly wasn't to me when I was playing the game. This attack is almost as annoying as Skygun's Saw, and Lord Baragon could have been unbeatable if he constantly used it. Thankfully, he only did it twice while fighting him. Once you unfreeze, you can run up and start damaging the gun, which does extra damage to him. This helped me to destroy him, and then it was time to play the third level type. I decided that I was going to use some gears to fight Manda and Gigan, and then fight Space Godzilla as Godzilla. It was only fitting. Before getting into the battles, I'll describe the third level type, the Arctic. The Arctic is exactly what you would guess from the name, an icy tundra with a few watery segments. The music reminded me a bit of Northern Hemispheres from Donkey Kong Country in 8-bit form. A very dangerous sounding song, and made me think about being trapped in a tundra and freezing to death. There were two new enemies in the stage. The first was a creature frozen in a block of ice. They block your way and you have to use that heat beam to thaw them out of the ice. They look a bit like a smaller version of Not Godzilla, only without the eye. When freed, they do a strange clawing movement and push you backwards. It doesn't cause you any damage, but it's a bit annoying. After dealing with the Iceman, I kept walking for a minute or two and came upon a water segment. I jumped in, and this time I managed to get a screen cap showing how the water splashes when you jump in. Don't know how they programmed it, but it's pretty impressive. Another interesting thing is how the screen changes focus when you go underwater. Here you can see the other new enemy, a little thing I call Spike Walker. They walk towards you and explode randomly or instantly if you attack them, sending spikes in every direction. The spikes don't do much damage, but they did get me dangerously close to falling into a pit a few times. Oh, speaking of the pits, Down into the water, the game has a platformer elements, bottomless pits. There weren't any of these in the original game, since it was strictly an action game, but the pits were a neat addition. After getting back on land, I encountered a very unexpected mini-boss, Maguma, the Walrus Kaiju. I know this game had obscure monsters to begin with, but wow. Not that I'm complaining. It's a pretty cool cameo for an unappreciated kaiju. Maguma's fighting tactics were very simple. He had a freeze beam and he could charge into you. Not really challenging, but certainly more entertaining than a Mantango mini-boss in the original game. One really interesting thing about Maguma is that he doesn't die when you defeat him. He turns tail and retreats. This was the first time I had ever seen an enemy monster change direction, let alone retreat. I tried to chase after him, but he disappeared after I got in the water. Poor bastard. And that is it for the arc. I'll talk about the monster fight next. I forgot to mention before, but the music that played during the new monster fights is reused from themes actually in the games. So far, the themes have been Titanosaurus, Godzilla's music, Biolante, Fedora's music, Orga, Baragon/Mogera's music, Manda, Varon's music, Space Godzilla, Mech Godzilla's music. As for the fight, Manda was a fairly crafty opponent. When it realized one tactic was ineffective, it would immediately change to a different one. Manda used quite a few tricks like spitting fire, biting, and the most irritating of all, constricting. It doesn't mercilessly drain your life down like Gigan's Cutter, but it was by far Manda's strongest attack. One last thing to note that I found pretty cool was that the Atragon showed up during the fight to help me out. Manda crushed it with ease, but it was still cool. After I slayed Manda, I played through an arc level for health power-ups, and then it was on to Gigan's replacements. When the fight started, I was very confused, because there was nothing there. I thought this was going to be like the Titanosaurus fight in Palos, but just about the time if we've been going back to the map, a piranha appeared on screen. But it wasn't there for long. As soon as it appeared, the speakers emitted an ear-splitting screech, and Not Gigan flew in and ripped the poor fish into pieces. Well, that's one way to get the player on their toes. That abrupt entrance scared the hell out of me and got my adrenaline rushing, which in retrospect was a good thing, because Not Gigan was one of the fastest, most unrelenting opponents in the game. Not Gigan was tough, but my new skills with Anguirus helped to even the score. This was still an incredibly intense fight. Not Gigan's attack consisted of some kind of blood laser he spews from his mouth and a downward slash. I was expecting some hellish variant of the Buster attack, but thankfully there didn't seem to be one. The Hollow attack was invaluable in defeating him. I would have taken more screen caps of the fight, but I really had to concentrate. After that, there was just one monster left to take down. Space Godzilla. As mentioned earlier, I used Godzilla for this fight. Space Godzilla's fighting technique was rather frustrating, but admittedly a very clever idea. Space Godzilla would use his energy to create two flying crystals, which would reach the ground and become crystal spires. These spires not only block you from reaching Space Godzilla, but it also allowed him to consistently recharge your full energy and blast you with a deadly fully charged Corona beam until you broke the spires. Space Godzilla would eventually drain his own spires of energy until they shattered. But if you waited for that to happen, you'd probably lose a lot of life. Heat beams actually seem to re-energize the spires, so you had to use physical attacks. When he finally got close enough to hit Space Godzilla, he was no pushover. When I punched him, he hit me back in just as hard. Space Godzilla does everything in his power to knock you back to the left corner on the screen so he can create more spires. By the time this was over, I only had about 5 life bars left, But it didn't matter because I didn't need to fight anymore. I needed to run. Here we go again. I decided right then that I really wanted to see the end of this game. As terrifying as these levels could sometimes be, I had to beat them to get through. I decided that no matter what happened, no matter what the game showed me, I was going to get to the end. Also, I made sure not to say a damn it word while playing a chase level from here on. For this chase, I tried Anguirus, since his raw attack allowed me to move faster than Godzilla or Mothra. The chase started up like the first two, except there was a river of blood below the ground. I was beginning to get the hang of it, and the extra speed from the roar helped me to get on the edge of the red monster. Especially since I didn't have to worry about a power limit and could keep going endlessly. Like the previous levels with water, the ground inevitably reached a stop. So I rolled off into the blood. To my surprise, the hell beast didn't fall after me. It just stopped at the edge of the ground and grimaced. I guess it can't swim, I thought to myself. So I went on the blood and continued moving. There wasn't anything around, but I knew something was up. The chase wasn't going to end that easily, could it? Surely something else had to show up. And sure enough, I heard the bellowing roar, sounding slightly different. And the monster was following after me in a new aquatic body. I had no idea it was a shapeshifter. After it reappeared, the chase started to get into the difficulty I expected. Being submerged slowed me down, putting me and the beast at about the same speed. The only thing that would keep me alive was fast thinking and reflexes. I encountered some bottomless pits in which mines floated up from. I assumed that if you hit one, it would damage you and knock you back. Considering how fast the red monster swims, hitting the mines would be instant death, so I went through great effort to avoid them. But that wasn't all I had to be wary of. Halfway through the chase, the Hell Beast revealed yet another surprise. A tentacle form of intestine and tipped with a clawed set of jaws burst from its mouth, trying to pull me in and devour me. I only barely avoided both the tentacle and the mines, but I could tell the beast was getting desperate because the chase was nearly over. And about a minute later, I had spotted a bit of ground that served as the exit. I leapt with all the might I could muster without breaking my controller. The beast screamed with rage and jumped out of the blood river in one last attempt to drag me down, but I escaped its grasp. This time, I fell back on my back and took a deep breath, satisfied with yet another successful escape. Now, I was headed to the fifth world. Entropy. In the original game, the sixth world was Pluto. Ironically, despite being the smallest planet, Pluto was the largest and most diverse world in the game. Entropy had a different layout, but was similarly huge and diverse. The board music was played by a violin instrument, a melody that started out sounding mournful and gets rather, I guess I would call it, distorted. It made me feel depressed and unnerved. Not something I would want to hear while trying to sleep. Strangely, none of the levels from the previous worlds were present here. Instead, there were 8 brand new icons. The bosses this time were Megalon, Batra, and Mechagodzilla. As usual, the first thing I did was go to the quiz level for another interrogation from Face. But when I got there, I noticed something different. Instead of the usual goofy GH1 Dora music, it was the password theme. The music change seemed to be intentional because after the first 2 questions on the start, the quiz started to take on a darker tone. Quiz 3. Do you like ice cream? Answer. Yes. Reaction with face number 1. Question number 2. Do you like clowns? Answer. Yes. Weird reaction. Weird face number 10. Is time slipping through your fingers? Answer. Yes. Reaction. Weird face number 2. Do you have any regrets? Answer. Yes. Reaction. Hurt. Do some people deserve to die? Answer. No. Reaction. Weird face number 3. Is it safe to go out at night? Answer. Yes. Reaction. Weird face number 5. Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Answer. Yes. Reaction. Weird face number 9. Have you ever killed anyone? Answer. No. Reaction. Weird face number 7. Do you want to kill anyone? Answer. No. Reaction. Angry. Are you actually accomplishing anything? Answer. No. Reaction. Weird face number 4. Does life have any real meaning? Answer. No. Reaction. Love. Do you like Martha? Answer. No. Reaction. Maniacal. I knew that the last one was going to be a gameplay related question, but I had no idea what the result would be. I answered honestly because, as I said before, I never liked Martha. Nobody liked playing as Martha in this game, and there was a good reason for that. Every other time Martha gets hit, she gets slammed back to the left corner of the screen, and she sucks at fighting because her attacks are so weak. The only benefit Martha had was being able to fly over obstacles in some levels. So I answered no, and Face actually replied back to me, not only with a maniacal expression, but with text.
Too bad.
I was taken back to the map screen, and I was shocked to see that Godzilla and Anguirus has disappeared from the board, leaving only Martha. Face had just fucked me over. Needless to say, I was pissed. But there wasn't anything I could do, and I'm willing to bet even if I had said yes, I would have been stuck with Martha anyway. Face giveth, and face taketh away. I took a deep breath and got ready to explore. There were 2 paths I could take through the board. I decided to take the lower one. This turned out to be a good choice for reasons I'll get to momentarily. The first road ahead of me was a forest, so I started there. Almost immediately, I got an eerie feeling. There was something about this level that just seemed off to me, even more than in previous ones. Perhaps it was the pitch black background. I've always been afraid of being in a forest at night. Something about all these trees makes me feel surrounded and vulnerable. And the fact that I was stuck as Martha didn't help. Playing the game's previous world as Godzilla gave me a feeling of bravery. Being in control of the king of the monsters, I'd be able to handle just about anything in my way. But it's not like that with Martha. No feeling of strength or security. Now I'm just a weak, easily overwhelmed bug traversing into the unknown. Back to the level. The music had new instruments, sounding like woodwinds, followed by slow, rhythmic drums and chiming bells. It gave me this feeling that I was intruding into some dangerous place I really should not be. After a while, I encountered the first enemies of the stage, or at least I assumed they were enemies. They were strange, long-legged deer-like creatures. Instead of attacking, they were just idly walking around. I went to approach them and they ran away. I thought about shooting one with an eye beam to see what would happen, but it seemed wrong. These creatures were harmless, so I passed over them and continued through the level. About halfway through, I encountered groups of the deer-like animals, and also 2 new creatures. A sloth-like creature with a beak climbing on a tree, and hairy raptor-esque beasts that were preying on the deer. It was very surreal watching these creatures interact. I didn't feel like I was playing a video game, but rather that I was traveling to a forest in some other dimension. The creatures ignored me for the most part, although the raptors did attack me when I get too close, or if I attacked them first. I know I shot one of them to help one of the deer creatures escape. I got clawed at, but confrontation was easily avoided by flying up to the top of the screen. After that, I had to choose what I wanted to play with the levels with the hourglass or the TV screen. I picked the latter. What I got was not at all what I expected. I pressed the button to start the level on the TV screen like I normally would. This screen with an animation popped up. There was also music in the background, which is the goofy GH1 Dora music that used to be playing in the quest levels. I was somewhat unsettled by that because it was just so strange. I also find it a bit spooky because I had a shirt that looked just like that when I was a kid. After starting the animation, you could go back to the board by pressing any button. After that, I had no idea what to expect of the rest of these icons. I went to try an hourglass icon next. I was somewhat relieved when an actual level came up. It was certainly an unorthodox looking level, all brown, with time measuring instruments floating in the air and gigantic grandfather clocks in the background. The music was the same as the board screen. And very early in the level, I encountered something I didn't expect to see. Original enemies from the game. And not just that. It seemed to be a whole fleet of them, and the yellow tanks, which were normally immobile, could now move. I took some damage, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. But the most interesting thing about this level was the colored hourglass items. There were 3 of them. The first one, a blue hourglass that made time slow down and filled the level with enemies from the past. The second one, a red hourglass that made time speed up and filled the level with enemies from the future. And the third one, a green hourglass that set time to the normal speed and filled the level with the original game enemies. I encountered the blue hourglass first. As stated, the game started to slow down and I saw the enemies from the past, which were 5 different types of prehistoric animals. I don't know much about prehistory, but I believe all these animals represent real animals. The level went into another segment, and I encountered the green hourglass, and then I found the original enemies again. It was the same 5 types, so I didn't take any screenshots. But in the last segment, I encountered the red hourglass, and the enemies that must have been from the future. Now, whether or not the game was showing me 8-bit renditions of creatures that will actually exist thousands of years into its future, I have no idea. But with that thought in mind, I found this particular segment to be very eerie, and it was made more tense because everything moved faster. One of the future enemies bore a striking resemblance to something I saw in a book once called Trudon Man. Another looked like some kind of organic spaceship. There was only one of the 5th type of future creature, and when it appeared, all the others ran for their lives, leaving me alone to battle it. It could fly, but its sprite didn't actually move, and its single attack was firing a lightning bolt from its face. Even so, it was surprisingly powerful, and I suppose it could be considered a mini-boss. After defeating it, it left a health power-up that restored the health and energy I had lost fighting it, which was convenient. It seemed I would need all the help I could get to beat this world with Morpher alone. After the previous stage, a cold time warp, The next stage appeared to be a toxic waste dump. As you can see, the place looked grungy and inhospitable. The music was short looping of an ambient synthesized song. Listening to it made me feel like I had sniffed some toxic fumes myself, and it was messing with my head the whole time. I even felt like I was choking while playing the level. The enemies all seemed to be mutated to some degree. In the above screenshot, you can see green mummies with bird skulls that jump out of the waist to spit projectiles. There's also a brownish cow skeleton monster with spider legs. Halfway through the level, I even saw one of the deer from the forest. It was alone, and when I saw it, it was drinking toxic waste out of the barrel with an anteater-like tongue. I was moving over to try to make it stop, but then this flock of skull birds came out of nowhere and started attacking. The deer was scared by this and ended up running off the ground into the toxic waste. I feel bad for it. One of the birds bit me, but I regained health quick from killing all of them. They were rather weak. I pressed onward. Of all the levels in Entropy, this was probably the most normal. In that, there was little deviance from the move forward smash things formula in the original game. I encountered some more creatures through the level, like tentacle blobs and some kind of deformed things with human-like teeth. I didn't feel like provoking them into a fight, so I kept on flying near the top of the screen. I still had to deal with the occasional flock of birds now and then. At the end of the level was a large bluish green lake, and there I encountered another mini-boss. Some kind of a monster with a long neck and a whale skull. It attacks with a mouth projectile, and by charging into you. It also could go in underneath the water and rapidly emerge from a different place. It was harder to beat than the boss from the time warp, and it had a lot of health because it must have taken me 3 minutes to defeat it. It let out a really loud noise when it died, and then sank back into the water as I left the screen. Back on the board, I went to the newest level icon I hadn't seen yet, which was the right tree, as I guess the level was a winter-themed recolor of the forest stage. But unlike the regular forest, I didn't feel a nerve starting this one. I think the music had a lot to do with it. It was a gentle, calm song. It almost sounded romantic. It was quite stress-relieving, and the forest itself looked much less ominous covered in snow. I traveled to the first segment enjoying the atmosphere for 4 minutes, when suddenly I realized something. I haven't seen a single creature since I started the level. Where are all the enemies? Soon after, I left the screen and the next segment started. In the second segment, I was still in the winter forest, but now the music was gone. I was starting to feel suspicious, but then I reminded myself that there were other empty levels in the game, and this was likely another one of those. But then, I heard something familiar. It was the 12-second looping music from Unforgiving Code starting up. I could feel my heart sink as I came across this horrible sight. It was a whole group of dead deer creatures covered in snow. Judging from the blackish blue tone of their skin, they must have all frozen to death. On closer inspection, some were missing body parts. Now I was frightened, but I still had to keep going. Before exiting the level, I was really hoping to see something resembling the previous forest animals in a living state. And sure enough, I did. It was a creature much like the big sloth, except this thing had white fur and was far more of a beaked gorilla. It was walking very slowly when I saw it, but I was happy to at least see something alive. However, it didn't stay that way for long. A pack of raptors, who must have sensed that something else was still alive, came rushing in from the right side of the screen. The big gorilla didn't stand a chance, as one of the raptors immediately lunged at it and ripped open its back legs. These winter raptors acted far different from the temperate relatives. While the other raptors only attacked while hunting prey or when provoked, the winter raptors seem to have all gone insane. They have attacked everything in sight. One was running back and forth crawling at night. Even the noises they made sounded different, more high-pitched and enraged. As I left the second segment, I even saw two raptors fighting to the death. They were both covered in injuries, and one of the raptors had been blinded in one eye. I took a screenshot, but I didn't stay to see who won the fight. I only had to get through one more segment before I could go back to the board screen. But in this segment, I was no longer in the winter forest, but instead a very empty grassy plain with a bright grey moon in the sky. The pleasant music of Winter Forest Part 1 had returned. And immediately, I started to feel dread. This is going to sound crazy, but it's the absolute truth. The game made this level from one of my memories. After a long stretch of nothing, I reached a lake. And then the moon fell down from the sky and began to hatch like an egg. When it did, a curled up humanoid figure fell into the lake as the moon halves quickly disintegrated. I heard a splash when it hit the water, then a moment of silence. Then the screen began to shake, and a new creature emerged from the water. And thus, I was introduced to a monster I called the Moon Beast. This was the only screenshot I took, as I was focusing all my concentration on winning the fight. And it was the most difficult fight yet. Stronger than any of the previous bosses, this creature would have been hard to take down with Godzilla, and with Mothra, it seemed nearly impossible. I suppose I would consider myself fortunate that the beast lacked any attacks like Gag and Saw, because if it had, I would have never won this. I barely had 3 bars of health when I finally hit this abomination. But what happened afterward is hardly what I call a reward. I've been trying to keep my promise and suppress this memory for years, but it seems as if I have to get it off my chest. This is a very painful memory for me, but the game already knows about it, and I think you should too. I'll just tell you the important parts because I don't like putting this experience back into my head unless if I have to. Back when I was in middle school, I had a girlfriend named Melissa. She suffered from some kind of mental disorder that caused her to go into episodes. When she was in an episode, she would stand or sit perfectly straight and still, and her face would instantly lose any expression she had before. She would speak very clearly without any hint of emotion. When it was over, she would start trembling and sometimes bury her face in her hands and remain silent for several minutes. I can't really convey the feeling it gave me in the words, and I won't try. You got to see this in person to understand. But despite this, she was a very kind person, and I cared about her dearly. We liked to hang out in a field at night and look at the stars. But one night, she didn't say anything to me at all. She just stared directly at the moon, trembling. I tried to talk to her, but she suddenly sprung up and ran into traffic. I tried to stop her, but it was too late. She got hit by a truck and was killed that night. I looked her right in the eyes when the wheels went off her neck. That sight has always haunted me. I know that the game knows about this because after I defeated the Moon Beast, this happened. After that, the game went back to the board screen. It was all I could due not to burst out screaming, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the controller. I knew the game was going to test me if I kept playing, but I had no idea it would go so far, or that it was even capable of doing what it just did. I could feel my brain going hair wide as I asked myself, did the game just read my mind? That didn't seem possible, but what other explanation was there? It was then that I could no longer deny what now seemed obvious. This game is alive. And not only that, it also can establish some kind of mental connection with the player. And yet, I couldn't convince myself to stop playing. I don't know if it was the game messing with my mind or just my stubborn curiosity, but even with the previous revelation, I really wanted to see this through the end. Even more than I did before I beat Dementia. Terrifying as it might be, even dangerous, I knew that if I quit playing, I would never be able to stop thinking about it. If I try to restart the game, it might go back to being normal again. How many people ever get to witness something like this firsthand, let alone be able to take screenshots of the whole thing? Fucked up as it was, this was the experience of a lifetime. But even so, I couldn't take any chances with my health. I had the TV remote right next to me, ready to turn the TV off in case I felt I was in actual danger. And if that didn't work, I would pull the plug out of the wall or just run out of the room. Surely that would be enough. Whatever powers the game has, it seemed to be confined to what it can show on the TV and whatever its mental connection could do. The latter was what worried me. I still didn't know what I was dealing with, so I wasn't about to underestimate it. I took a break for a few moments to calm my nerves, and then it was back to the game. And speaking of TVs, there was a TV screen icon right below the white forest I had just left, and because the first animation was so bizarre, I figured I'd try another to see what happens. Although I expected the same animation, I actually got a totally different one. Weird. The music for this one was the Neptune board music. Fitting, I suppose, since it's a fishman and all. I can't help but wonder what the point of these things are. There was one more TV screen icon, so I figured it must have a unique animation of its own. I was going to make sure to see what it was before I left Entropy. But then it was time for another level. The gold brick icon was the closest thing, so I went to that and I started up in a gold labyrinth level. My health and power were filled. Not sure how or why, but I was glad not to be heading in the unknown nearly dead. I also noticed that my Morpha sprite had shown to have its original size. The music was a slow, ominous drum beat, with a few vocals kicking in about a minute into it. Quite often. The gold labyrinth itself was an anomaly. I'm not sure how this level would have played out if I was using Godzilla or Anguirus, because flying seemed necessary just to get around this place. Another thing that caught my attention was that when you go left, your monster turns and faces the left. That sounds stupidly obvious, but in the original game you were only supposed to move to the right, so when you tried to move to the left, your monster ended up walking flying backwards. This level was apparently gigantic in size because every time I thought I had to reach an end to it, or I thought I was going to end up back where I started, I encountered something totally new. Things like lava blockades, new enemies, and statue faces. And I found one statue face at a dead end with a wide open-eyed stare. The night Melissa died, she had an expression on her face that looked exactly like this the whole time. Even when she got hit by the truck, she still had that same expression. I can't help but feel like something really is staring at me from behind the screen when I look at this. I really didn't want to be reminded of that night anymore, so I left the statue almost as soon as I found it. I needed to find the exit anyway, which proved to be no simple task. It felt like this level stretched on forever in all directions. I must have wandered around the level for at least 15 minutes before I finally saw something. It was a creature that wasn't gold, seemingly the only one of its kind in the level. Lacking any kind of hover ability like the other creatures, it just walked back and forth on the platform. But it wasn't long after I found it that a flying machine swooped down and grabbed it, and then flew off with it. The machine apparently had not seen me, so I decided to follow it, to see where it was taking the creature. The machine stopped at a room with a large cauldron-like object in the center. The machine hovered over to the cauldron and dropped the creature into it. The creature emerged from a hole in the cauldron side, now adorned in the same gold color as everything else. The machine flew off. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but I'm glad I came upon it, because I found the exit soon after. When I got back to the boards, I realized that the bosses hadn't moved at all. A bit odd, but it didn't bother me. I made planning my route through entropy easier. There were still 2 new icons to explore, the indigo cliffs and a black version of the labyrinth. Since there were only 3 black labyrinth icons, which are surrounded by bosses, I played the indigo cliffs first. It was a lot like the blue/green mountains. The level graphics had the same shredded look to it. There's also a recolor of the clouds and moon from the Toxic Waste stunt. The music, if you can call it that, was merely a deep rumbling noise. One of the first things I encountered were these multicolored creatures with big heads emerging from a small cave in the ground. They all made a synchronized shaking sound, and they walked to the right in a group after emerging from the cave, ignoring me. Having no other way to go, I followed them on the roof. More and more emerged from the cave, until the group had about 100 creatures. Eventually, the pathway ended in a cliff. I was shocked to see that, upon reaching the cliff, all the creatures began jumping off into the abyss. I've seen enemies walk off cliffs before, but I've never seen NPCs commit mass suicide like this. A very unsettling way to start off a level. I continued on, flying over various strange animals like the ones shown here. Another group of multicolored bobbleheads was jumping up and down, only to be snatched up by large birds, which I'm fairly certain are sprite versions of the giant condor from Godzilla vs. the Sea Monster. I defeated some of the condors in battle, but it bothered me that these bobbleheads seem to be so eager to die. If the game itself is alive, perhaps the creatures in these levels are also alive? And some have very unhappy lives, if this behavior is any indication. But what provokes them to do this? In the back of my mind, I almost suspected the glowing moon in the sky is the reason. At the end of the level, I saw yet another group of bobbleheads marching up to a large monster and being devoured. This was starting to disgust me, so acting on impulse, I fired off I-beams at both the monster and the bobbleheads. I destroyed the cave. The monster became angry and ran through the remaining bobbleheads to fight me. Although it lacked any ranged attacks, it was relentless. But it was no match for me. I was in the home stretch now, up to the bosses. My plan was to go through Botha first, then Megalon. After that, I would watch the last TV screen, play the back labyrinth, before fighting Mecha Godzilla, and lastly, going to the chase with the Hell Beast. I was curious to see if it would be in a new form again. But first things first, time to beat the Barger. As I expected, he started off in his lava form. The music was Varon's battle theme. Whenever the game puts in a new Godzilla kaiju with more than one form, that other form always shows up. For a game that's otherwise inexplicable, it's rather startling in its consistency and accuracy with the new kaiju bosses. The fight started off simple. Lava Batua fought in a similar fashion as Maguma did, charging back and forth and occasionally firing off lightning from its horn. During the fight, I noticed that Morpho's combat capabilities had been altered in my favor. First, the I-beams did double as much damage as they did originally. Now they was as strong as Godzilla's punches. The poison powder was similarly improved. It also did this nice thing where it would actually hit an enemy when you used it. And the second thing, in the original game, even though Martha could fly, she was unable to fly over an opponent. You would get knocked back the same way as if you just ran straight into them, which is extremely annoying. But not anymore. I could change direction and fly around, which is a big help because fighting Imago Batra is much like fighting a clone Mothra, although Batra is distinctly faster and stronger. No longer impeded by its slow-moving lava form, Imago Batra was a fearsome opponent. Although it lacked the Horn Lightning, it now had a new, more powerful Eye Beam. Batra could change direction just like I could, so this battle involved a lot of flipping and flying around. It was pretty damn fun, to be honest. So after defeating Batra, I was excited to see what Megalon would be like. But first I went through an Indigo Cliffs level and shot through a lot of the creatures for the health power-ups. So about Megalon. His music was Gigan's theme. Makes sense since Gigan was his battle partner in Megalon's one and so far only film appearance. He was a lot like Mogera, but faster and with more weapons. He started out charging up with his drills. I like to fly back and forth around him, which seemed to really annoy him. After a few seconds, he'd step back, turn around, and start spinning out grenades. Those were a pain because they bounced when they hit the ground. Lastly, he started spamming his lightning beam. It only went straight forward, so it was easy to duck under it and then shoot him with eye beams. Overall, I'd describe him as strong, persistent, but dumb. I was now nearing the end of Entropy. I had just taken down Megalon and I started up the last TV screen to see what I would get this time. The result was unpleasant. The music for this gruesome scene was the password theme. I couldn't figure out why this animation was so sinister and violent in comparison to the other two. The whole game seemed to be growing more malevolent. As I went to finish Entropy, I began to feel drained. It's hard to describe it. Like I had suddenly became tired when I wasn't before. Most likely it was just the tension from all that happened in this game getting to me, but who knows? The last level type on Entropy is what I call the Shadow Labyrinth. The scenery was recolored from gold to black. The music was an evil ambience, similar to the Unforgiving Cold loop, but distinctly different. The music was my first sign that this level was going to be distressing. I traveled through the maze for about a minute, and I noticed there weren't any creatures hovering around. It was an odd transition from the Gold Labyrinth, which is overrun with creatures, to this level that had nothing at all. But then, this might be a good thing, because maybe there weren't any obstacles and I could get through the level with ease. Then the screen went dark. And immediately I snapped out of my daze from a few seconds earlier. Everything had been darkened so that the only thing I could see was the Morphos fight. I couldn't tell where I was going and then I ended up frantically running into walls. I heard a noise, the sound of a clown running through a hallway. And along with the running came the roars. Loud, roaring sounds, which I would describe as something like a rabid dog, the size of an elephant, screaming with fury. And I could tell that whatever was making this noise, there were lots of them. I knew there was something there, but it wasn't until I did some screen cap editing that I got to see what my pursuers looked like. But at the time I couldn't see where they were, or where I was going. I was literally running blind and this mob of beasts eventually caught up with me. All I could think was, no! As I saw my life bar rapidly declining. The monsters had taken me down to half of my total health when I was saved. The lights came back on and the attackers had disappeared. And so the challenge of this level was revealed. Find the exits before the lights go out and a pack of monsters maul you to death. I was in a panic mode now, moving as fast as I could while trying every path I could find for a way out. As I played through the level, the lights went out total of 3 times. The second time, I would have been dead meat had it not been for one of the wide-eyed statues. As I sat close to it, the monster seemed to all avoid me until the light came back. The statue warded them away somehow. I was safe as long as I sat near the statue, but at the same time I had to leave to find the exit. The Shadow Labyrinth turned out to be much smaller than the Gold Labyrinth, as it only took about 6 minutes to navigate to the end. But before the exit, there was a row of halls leading straight down, with no way out once entered. You either got to the exit before the monsters reached you, or you died. Thankfully, I made it out. Only one more boss, NES Godzilla. I started the battle and got something unexpected. Not only did my life shoot back up to 100% again, it seems to do that randomly, but instead of a replacement boss, I was fighting Godzilla. But any Godzilla fan worth their salt can figure this out. NES Godzilla started off like fighting a clone Godzilla, but his disguise burned away after only 3 life bars. Usually a transformation only occurred at the halfway point. At this point, it was like fighting NES Godzilla in the normal game. Felt kinda nice to find one of the original game enemies for a change. Although he wasn't exactly like normal, he also had a rainbow beam and finger missiles. This prevented me from doing the old trick of backing him into the corner and hitting him with eye beams in a spot where he can't hit me. But that was always a cheap trick anyways. But after getting him down to half his health, something weird started to happen. His pride started to glitch, in much the same way as Godzilla had way back in the first world. After a few seconds, the glitches began to form a new shape. And thus, the game had created not Mechagodzilla. And I discovered that this visual glitch was somehow related to the game recreated things. The human face on this one gives it a very uncanny look. It was one of the stronger replacement monsters and had the most firepower. Pictured here is its mouth beam, which I got caught in the middle of it. Even though it was a bit stronger, it was also slower than its original counterpart and couldn't jump around as much. I won the fight by constantly staying out of its line of fire, bombarding the machine with poison powder and as I flew over it. One last thing to do. The health beast chase. Oh boy. Might as well just get this over with, I thought. The entropy end chase ended up being exactly what I was afraid of. What I was afraid it would be. A labyrinth level. All the other chases, although difficult, were extremely straightforward. You just had to run to the right and not get touched. But this took all the simplicity out of it. There was no telling how big this labyrinth would be or where the exit was. And now not only did I have to constantly backtrack to find my way out, I also had to avoid getting one hit killed by the red monster. And for those first 30 seconds, it didn't show up. But I knew it would. And as I started picking up the pace, I heard a loud flapping noise. And there it was, in a flying form. It flew with bat-like wings and was as fast and relentless as ever. For reasons already stated, this was probably the most nerve-wracking of all the end chases, and as such I had to keep my focus on the game and not taking screen caps. However, I did take one of the red monsters doing something I found very interesting. I had managed to lose it by going through a different path than I apparently expected, and it was blocked from attacking me by one of the organic walls of the red labyrinth. Or so I thought. It tried clawing to the wall for a second before opening up its mouth and tearing the wall apart with intestine jaws. For those brief milliseconds that the monster was held back might have been the key to me finding the exit. The path to the exit was long and complex, but from what I remember I went up and then back towards the left. I'm still not sure why I chose the particular way. Just a lucky hunch, I suppose. I was sweating profusely, but my luck had saved me yet again. I hoped that I wouldn't run out before I finished the game. There were only 2 more worlds to go. Next was the penultimate world called Ecstasy. In the brief instant before the transition between Entropy and Ecstasy, I was hoping that I would get Godzilla and Anguirus back. As the words appeared, I saw that my wish was half granted. I had Godzilla back, but no Anguirus. I would have preferred both, but despite Anguirus' neat abilities, I would have chosen Godzilla if I had to pick between the two. Ecstasy had 2 different colored temples, white and pink. A pyramid, what looked like some modern buildings, and 2 other icons I couldn't figure out at the time. The new bosses were Killmonger, Gorosaurus, and not Ghidorah, whom I was dreading to see, let alone fight. With Godzilla back, I was excited again and eager to explore, yet still cautious. I went to the quiz level first, just as before. This time, Face's questions were more random than ever. Quiz 4. Do elephants breathe? Answer: yes. Reaction: with face number 2. Have you ever been molested by a family member? Answer: no. Reaction: weird face number 6. Have you ever raped anyone? Answer: no. Reaction: weird face number 8. Is green your favorite color? Answer: no. Reaction: weird face number 10. Is the computer the pinnacle of modern technology? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 4. Are you a tough guy? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 12. Can you fly? Answer: no. Reaction: weird face number 9. Can you stand on your head? Answer: yes. Reaction: weird face number 7. Do you hate raccoons? Answer: no. Reaction: confused. Do you feel blame? Answer: no. Reaction: weird face number 11. Would you like a new monster? Answer: yes. Reaction: surprise. Will you miss me? Answer: yes. Reaction: sad. I was happy that I was getting a new monster, but that last question bothered me. Will you miss me? Is Face referring to when I finished the game? I thought. Since the revelation of the game's truly outworldly nature, I wasn't sure what to think of Face or anything else in the game. But something about that last statement gave me a genuine feeling of sadness for Face. As I was thinking about this, the game had gone back on the board. I had a new monster, but I had no idea who it was supposed to be. The sprite had a slight resemblance to Roland, but the head was totally off. I moved this mysterious newcomer to a white temple icon and started the level. When I started the level, this screen appeared with the text, "Find the gym." Presumably instructions for beating the level. After that, I got my first look at the new player monster. A hairy, dark blue creature with bat wings and a skull-like face named Solomon. And I also found that my path was blocked by a beam of light and a small pillar with a plate on it. I figured that this beam of light was blocking the exit, so I have to find the gem and drop it on the plate to deactivate the beam. How exactly I was going to do that, I didn't know. There wasn't anything in the original game requiring you to find an item to beat a level. I'd have to find out when I obtain the gem. The only direction I had to go was left, so on I proceeded. Solomon was an interesting monster, to say the least. He was capable of both flight and heave beam, both of which proved to be very useful. He could also click and slash with his wings, but he couldn't duck. The White Temple's music was a vocalizing choir, or a video game approximation of such. It's hard to describe, but it had a very holy sound to it. It wasn't long before I started running into waves of strange new enemies. They did little to stop me. I ran past them while slashing and didn't take any damage. There was a pause between each wave of enemies. After you killed about 10, there wouldn't be any for about a minute, then the next wave would appear. After 5 minutes, I noticed holes in the floor and ceiling. Guillotine-mouthed creatures were rapidly flying up and down these crevices, so I had to time my jumps carefully because I didn't know if I'd get another shot at this. Luckily, I managed to get through without a scratch. I'm just lucky, I guess. After that, I found myself at the end of the hallway, facing some kind of mini-boss monster. It moved fast, and had some kind of projectile that it shot in 4 directions, but I killed it quite easily using Solomon's heat beam. When the battle was over, I had my gem, which was inside the creature's head. I found that I could pick up and hold the gem by walking over it and holding down B. I made a long trek back to the start, deposited the gem on the plate, which deactivated the beam. I left the stage and was shown what was probably the strangest quirk relating to the Solomon monster. Still the best. 1973. Every time you complete a stage or defeat a boss with Solomon, this screen appears. I have no idea what Still the Best 1973 means. Neither the date nor the phrase has any meaning or significance to me that I can think of, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. The next level I played was one that I call the Bronze Pyramids. I used Godzilla and found he had been leveled up to 12 since I last played him, as him in Dementia. The Bronze Pyramids were fairly normal as far as these levels go, but the visuals were quite interesting, almost unusually colorful and lively. The music had a fittingly Egyptian style to it. It was slow and mysterious sounding. I strode through the level, fighting the various enemies. None were too difficult, although the ants can be a pain if you ran into too many at once. My favorite enemy was this giant reptile I encountered halfway through. At the end of the level, I came to a giant pyramid and I engaged in yet another mini-boss fight. Although this one was a bit different, because I had to fight 2 of these monsters at the same time. Individually, I could have dealt with them easily, but fighting both of them at once was challenging. But I sped things up by tricking one of the twin beasts into barbecuing his brother by jumping when he uses his flame breath. After defeating the twin monsters, I noticed something strange after returning to the board. I was now able to move my masterpiece anywhere on the board, without limits. Normally, Godzilla can only move 3 spaces each turn, and Mothra can move 5. I wanted to try out Solomon some more, so I moved this piece over to one of the brown pillar-looking icons with colored dots, and started the level. When I got to the level, I then realized what the level icon represented. Totem poles. I was greeted by 2 of them right at the beginning. The music had a Native American sound to it. It seemed to be using the same instruments as the entry before us. It was noticeably different, but just as foreboding. I walked around for 3 minutes, with nothing else in sight besides the totem poles. I didn't realize until then, but I was expecting another level with things alive in it. After all the activity in Entropy, walking by all those multicolored faces, the unnerving level left me feeling like I was being watched. Only about 10 minutes after I started Extras, I was already halfway through. After getting back from the totem pole level, I tried out one of the TV screens to see how strange they were this time. Even more strange than before, apparently. The music for this was the Uranus theme. I switched back to Godzilla to play another level, and this level was quite a surprise. It was a normal city level. The colors were gloomy, but even still, this was quite a shock. This was the kind of level I would expect to see in a Godzilla game, and I was kind of mad that I didn't get to play it earlier. The music was the Earth theme. I found it strange that a level fitting a Godzilla game would show up this late, but there's no point crying over split milk, I suppose. I moved Solomon over to a grayish-green icon, which turned out to be a giant high-tech laboratory of some sort. Lots of mechanical drones in this level, but Solomon treated them just like the White Temple enemies. The music was gritty, industrial beat. There was also a strange flying cyborg enemy, which was annoying because it would fly away when you jumped to attack it. Also of interest were these large stasis tanks holding some kind of monster inside. As you would guess, sometimes the monsters awaken and shatter through the glass. I tried to get past the stasis tanks as fast as possible, but because of the monsters inside proved to be vicious little bastards upon release. At the end of the level was an elevator which I used to go down to the bottom of the level, where the exit was. Along the way, I was shot at by security drones. I couldn't leave the elevator, so my only defense was the heat beam. The last level type was a simple thing that I called the Hurt Temple, for obvious reasons. Nothing but a big hallway filled with floating enemies shaped like human hearts. They're incapable of causing you damage, so what you do is run through the level, smashing as many as you can to get all the power-ups. One run through these levels would get the life meter back up to full, and I would greatly appreciate these levels later. The Hard Temple's music reminded me of a circus tune, had an overly cheerful sound to it, which gave the level a really weird feeling. Having seen all the level types, I chose to fight Gorosaurus using Solomon. The music for this fight was Ghidorah's theme. It was during this fight I realized that Solomon is overpowered. A single well-aimed slash can take down as many as 4 of the enemy's life bars. Due to this, the fight was over very quickly. Gorosaurus had no projectile attacks or anything else that could match Solomon's deadly claws, but I kept the fight going just long enough to see if Gorosaurus would use his iconic kangaroo attack. I was greatly pleased when he did. Even though I knew Solomon was my fighting ace, I used Godzilla to battle Kamonga just for variety. I briefly considered using Mothra, but of course Godzilla won out. Kamonga was also a simple opponent, no hit beams or anything. He attacks by jumping on you, stabbing with his mandibles, and also uses his signature webbing stream to paralyze you. Once you get webbed, Kamonga will sometimes take the opportunity to attack, but it's mostly a way to buy some time, like Ghidorah backing you in the corner until the time runs out. His music was Ghidorah's theme. With Gorosaurus and Kamonga defeated, I was at the end of Exodus. Before I fight not Ghidorah, there was something I had to do. I wasn't expecting much from it, but for the documentation's sake, I took a look at the other screen. This is what it was. I don't think there was ever much reason behind the TV screens. If I were to guess, I'd say it's some random, uncontrolled manifestation of the cartridge's abilities. Or maybe all this makes perfect sense to the game. Who knows? Anyway, Mr. Fawcett's theme was the Saturn music. It was time for the opponent I had been dreading, not Ghidorah. Although I had gained courage with Solomon's combat adventures, I was still nervous, and when I started the fight, I was immediately confused. My opponent was not Ghidorah. I defeated the imposter with a few strikes, and then Not Mogera appeared. It made sense. In order to get to Not Ghidorah, I had to battle all the previous replacements first. I tore my way through them until I finally made it to Not Ghidorah, who was adored. Once I stopped laughing, I destroyed him with only 2 slashes. The music stopped, and I thought I was going back to the board. But the battle wasn't over yet. The real fight was against the Chimera, a monstrous hybrid of all the replacement beasts. This was by far the most difficult boss yet. Every attack of his would cut down whole life bars for use, while attacks against him were greatly weakened. Solomon's Slash, for example, was now lucky to take away 1/2 a life bar. During this battle, I gained a great appreciation for two things: the boss fight time limit and the hurt tempo. Had it not been for those things, I might never have beaten this boss. To take down this behemoth, I came up with a strategy. I would switch between Godzilla and Solomon as one began to get dangerously low on health. I would take him through the hard tempo while fighting Chimera with the other. I should count my blessings that Chimera couldn't regain lost health. A very interesting thing about Chimera was that the colored section on his body corresponded to his different body parts, so each body part effectively had its own life meter. The head was invincible as long as the other parts were present, and would always be the last part to be destroyed. In addition to being difficult, it was also the longest fight so far. I tried to remember how many times I got taken out of the fight by the timer, but I lost count around 13. Eventually, I had destroyed all components, but the head, which now flew around on its own at an incredible speed. Chimera fought well, but I was extremely determined, and once he was reduced to a head, he no longer had the power to defeat Solomon, and I heat beamed him into an oblivion. And then, Chimera was no more. I was exhausted after that drawn-out fight, and worried that might affect my performance in the end world chase level. The headquarters icon was replaced, but not by the Hell Beast face. Instead, it was a crucifix. I was completely stunned. I wasn't excited about seeing the Hell Beast icon again, but if there was only one good thing about those levels, is that they were predictable. I had a basic idea of what to expect. But now, here I was at the end, and the icon was completely different. What did it mean? And why a crucifix? It made me very uneasy. I attempted to start the level with Solomon, but couldn't. I got this notice that simply stated, Solomon can't enter here. It didn't say why, but I think maybe it has to do with Solomon's demonic appearance. Since Solomon was out of the question, I went with Godzilla instead. Once I saw the level, the crucifix made sense. The level was a graveyard. I was still on edge, thinking this was some kind of sick trick. The last level had always involved running from the demonic beast, and I wasn't going to be fooled into thinking this would be any different. So I started out running, but after a minute without interruption, I slowed down. It was during this time that the music caught my attention. I knew it sounded familiar when I first heard it, but it took a while before I realized what it was. An 8-bit rendition of Prayer for Peace from the first Godzilla film. A very sad, powerful song even in this form. At 2 minutes into the level, I encountered something that I wasn't sure how to react to. My first instinct was to run, but the blue statue-esque being simply fallen in place. And I felt compelled to just stare at it for a time. Since this was a grave and it was flying over a chapel, I guess that this was some kind of angel watching over the deceased. It gave me a strange but warm feeling. I wouldn't say happy, but I felt that I was at peace somehow. I had never seen this being before, yet it seemed very familiar to me. Just as I was going to leave, the Hell Beast appeared, and its presence warped the music into a terrifying discordant screeching and transformed the level. Desecrating the tombstones at a new ground appeared, comprised of blood-soaked bodies. I could feel my heart now beating out of control. I had no chance of escape with the monster that close. It launched with a kill, but the angel got in its way. The demon roared and started crawling through the angel's leg, and tears of blood streamed from its eyes. I wanted to save the angel, but there was nothing I could do. I had to honor its sacrifice and run. And so I ran through the hellish landscape as fast as I could. The beast soon caught up with me, still swallowing the body of the angel, whose legs it had torn off. And this sight made my terror change into anger. I now found myself hating this horrible monster. There was no doubt in my mind that it was pure evil, and I wanted it to die. When I got to the end, I remembered how it responded to my insulting trance. I spoke to it and said, "You're going to pay." This was its response. I had no idea how I would follow up on that threat, and nothing could have prepared me for the horrors of the final world. Zenith. And here we are, at the final world. I don't like to discuss the spot, and it still bothers me very much, but it's something I have to do so that I can put this behind me. People deserve to know. At this point, I was well aware of the game's unnatural nature, but Zenith was different than the other worlds. Well, the others was certainly strange and something frightening. The world of Zenith was like a nightmare. And I didn't have to go any further than the board screen for an indication that something was wrong with Zenith. The first thing I noticed was the blood red texture of the board and the music, which was an eerie whistling tune. I noticed that I had Solomon and Indira's back, and I felt better for a second. Then I scrolled over to the right to see who my enemies would be this time. This time, it was Destroyer and Ghidorah. But judging from the icon, it was a different Ghidorah than the original, standing on the ground instead of flying. The grotesquely detailed pinkish red icon also caught my eye. I couldn't tell what it was supposed to be, and I was afraid to find out. Going back to my side of the board, I decided there wasn't much choice but to do my usual routine in going into the quiz level before doing anything else. I was not ready for what happened. I jumped back when this appeared, accompanied by a terribly distorted version of the password theme. It looked like as if the face had fallen victim to some terrible glitch. Is this what he meant by "will you miss me"? Did he know this would happen? My thoughts were stopped short as I noticed the screen was glitching and seemingly falling apart, or I was inactive and so I quickly rushed out. And when I got back to the board, I had somehow gained a new monster. I hadn't even been asked if I wanted one. I tried to select it and this happened. What the hell is going on? The game's behavior was scaring me, and I hadn't even started the levels yet. I couldn't understand why I was randomly given a new character and then denied use of it. But for the time being, there was a little that could be done. I viewed the last TV screen. No animation, no music, dead. Every instant I had was telling me to stop playing, to just turn the game off. And something in the game itself might have been trying to warn me as to just how horrible this last world was. But then, every step of the way I was compelled to give up. I couldn't do that now, on the last world. Besides, after taunting me with memories of Melissa, I think the game owed me some answers. I noticed that the first level was Red Temple, so at least I would be familiar with the level graphics, if nothing else. And I went in with Godzilla, the monster I was most familiar with. Godzilla had been shrunk, the level and score meters had vanished, and the Blue Temple statue faces were back. The music was similar to the Blue Temple also, strange, haunting vocalizations. I tried to get my spirits up by thinking, Well, if this level is like the Blue Temple, then that might mean there are no enemies to deal with. How wrong I was. After a short walk, all the statues I started glowing, and a pack of the beasts from Shadow Labyrinth came charging into me. Since they were coming from the right of the screen, I had to find my way through them. The battle greatly tested my reflexes, but thanks to my speed, I plowed through the beasts. They gave off health power-ups after dying, which helped recover the damage they had given me. However, as I continued into the hallway, the statue's eyes glowed again, summoning another wave. It seemed to be the same number of them, but I was less prepared this time and took more damage. I had gone through 4 of these waves until I reached the end of the hall, where I heat beamed the last of the monsters over the edge into an abyss. At first it seemed that I had to reach a dead end, but after the statue's eyes stopped glowing, a brick path slowly appeared before me. I followed the path, which kept me moving towards the right till it stopped at a wall, where I was to go vertically by jumping up ledges. Along the way, I encountered new creatures in some sort of strange shrine, which had a statue of the Hell Beast and some other creature I don't recognize. As I went through, the path took a downward direction. I had to carefully aim my gems to avoid the enemies, which were plentiful in this part of the stage. They didn't even have many attacks, but they can easily shove you over the edge of a platform. At the end of this tunnel, there were a few small platforms floating above nothingness. I landed on one towards the left of the screen, and then something came down from above. It looked like the Blue Angel graveyard, except now it was red and had a skull face. Any of the pleasant feelings I had from the Blue Angel were not present with this red one. As it hovered around, its eye socket started glowing just like the statues, summoning monsters to attack me. Surely this was not the same benevolent being I encountered before. This must be some kind of imposter. The battles was nerve-wracking, as I started off with nearly half my health and had to deal with multiple opponents, as well as the threat of gravity. To make things even worse, as the Red Angel took damage, some of the panels fell until only 3 remained. But my luck had not run out yet. Just when I thought it was over, I struck the Red Angel one more time, and it turned out that one last hit was all it could take. Just as the Red Angel completely disintegrated, the game instantly went back to the Zenith board. I moved off Mothra over to the newest stage from the Red Temple, which seemed to be a garbled mess of letters spelling kill, and began playing. As expected, all the level graphics were made of jumbled letters, and Mothra, just like Godzilla, was shrunk to half size. I began to suspect that all the Zenith levels would be like this. The background music was terrible, like if someone put all the sounds on a NES was capable of making into a blender and then piecing them back together into a song. I had to turn the volume down because of it. Playing as Mothra made avoiding the enemies easier, but they were nonetheless determined to get at me. The first enemies I saw were headless Gigants, and later on there were hybrid monsters pieced together from previous bosses, like the Biolante and heading seen above. 5 minutes had gone by as I didn't see anything new, and the level shifted into another segment. The music changed from the loud and annoying beeps into something far more ambient and menacing. The level graphics also changed, now looking a blood-drenched junkyard. The way everything in this level was red made it sickening to look at. The enemies multiplied in number, never ceasing to follow after me, and became harder and harder to avoid. And at the end of the level, the situation reached a climax as the swarms of monsters fused together in one enormous, terrifying hybrid. Once I had gotten through the initial shock, I discovered the way to destroy its stink, constantly shooting eye beams at the Hedora cluster that formed its head. If it attacked anyone else, it would regenerate the damage. Even with that knowledge, this was an extremely difficult fight. I'd say it was as hard as fighting the Moon Beast was, if not harder. Its most common attack was lunging forward with its arms, covered with Gigantosaurus and blades if they touched it. it would instantly drain health. When it was over, the remaining monsters collapsed into a heap. Then they and the ground below them started to disintegrate and sink towards the bottom of the screen. When I came back to the board, I thought to myself, so far, the game has been putting the easiest levels first. If that's the case, how bad would the rest of Zenith be? With 2 levels down and 3 to go, my monsters and I had taken our foothold in a world of nightmares that was Zenith. Deciding what action to take next was more tense and difficult than ever before. But ultimately, I had no way of knowing what the next levels would be like, or how well my monsters would be prepared for them, so my only option was to guess. I tried to interpret what the icons of the next levels ahead of me were. The last level before the boss battles was obviously representing some kind of volcanic area with lava and open flames. The middle icon, I still didn't get it, except that it looks fleshy and vaguely like an organ of some kind. Oddly oversized as well. The one I was nearest to and about to enter next looked like thorny vines covering a puddle of blood. I guess this would be a level with blood rivers, like the chase level of Dementia. As such, I went with Anguirus, because due to his rolling move, he would have the fastest speed while submerged. The level which I call Blood Lake looked like I expected. Rivers of blood accompanied by thorn-covered vines, which were scattered along the sides of the ground. The music was rather faint, but I could hear a distinct drum beat and a few other instruments, a lot of echoes, and sometimes it sounded like someone was hitting a drum underwater. I was disappointed to see that Anguirus was shrunk, just as Godzilla and Marchfire had been. Apparently all the Zenith levels would be like this. I felt less secure with my giant monsters no longer so giant. I walked along without interruption for only a minute, and then my path reached a dead end. There was a massive gap between the ground I was walking on and the ground of the right. To the right of the screen, I would have swam across and then continued walking to the right, but due to the huge mass of brambles in the way, there was no way to go. 2 creatures with gliding membranes on their arms and lamprey-like mouths were perching outstretched vines and screeching at me, much like a crow does to an invader of its territory. Another unnerving display of possible sentence by the creatures of this game. If it's even accurate to refer to them as being of the game, that is. I descended into the blood, slowly sinking to the floor. Aquatic enemies were everywhere, and they were hard to avoid. The black shark in particular was very aggressive and hard to deal with, but thankfully, I only encountered one. As the scene became more and more crowded, I swam up to the surface and to find that it was littered with floating corpses. Creepy, but at least they're not Trev. Or so I thought. Until they all sprang to life and leaped on me. They were trying to pull me under, and they were draining my health as they did it. They all attacked as group, and when I got one off me, another would jump on me from behind. I had to curl up into a ball and roll for them to loosen their grip, and when they did, I quickly retreated. It wasn't long before I had reached another lamp bear. A note regarding the brambles: you can stand on them, but it causes pain. And you can also destroy some of the vines, but only the thinner ones. I had to destroy multiple vines first, dealing with more enemies. I was interrupted by a scream. The screen was only up for about 30 seconds. Then when it went back to the level, I was facing another dead end, and a pregnant humanoid creature being pinned from the top right of the screen by a spine/umbilical cord. Instantly, the creature's belly was slit open from the inside. And as the lower part of its body was ripped apart and fell into the river below, the blood legs was revealed. It came flying towards me, making a shrill, hacking scream. I was forced to move back. The bat was a highly mobile boss, fast and difficult to hit. As it moved back along the ground, the monster opened its mouth and shot out a barrage of needles. I jumped over them and managed to give it a blow to the head, and it started flying out of my reach. As the bat was flying, It shot a stream of fire from its eye sockets and started trying to hit me with the flames. I rolled along the ground, which strained my power, but us at an equal speed. This cycle repeated around 3 times until the monster was defeated. With most of my health drained, I went back to the edge of the level, and the large bramble vine blocking the exit was now gone. Now, only 2 levels left to go. Who to send this time? Godzilla, Mothra, and Anguirus had all completed 1 level, the Living Solomon. And also the mysterious 5th monster I tried again to exit it, but with no luck. I chose to use Godzilla again for the next level and Solomon for the final one. The second to last level was what I referred to as the organic level, which is the most visually unpleasant of them all. Right from the start, I could see the graphics were freakishly different. The atmosphere was gruesome and foreboding with the addition of the loud, droning music. I was dreading what I would see in these levels, and it was only a few seconds before something appeared. 2 hideous things. It's hard to describe most of this level. Everything had this disturbing semi-real look to it. Most of the enemies look halfway between real animals and misshapen lumps of gore with teeth. It's also worth noting that all of them were considerably larger than Godzilla, and although the majority were not very intelligent, each of them took around 30 plus hits to kill. Due to this, it was a better idea to run away from them than fight, but it was never clear exactly what direction to run into. While most levels involved going to the right to get to the exit, the path of this level was primarily going down by walking to the edge of one platform and jumping down to a lower one. There was no way to make sure you were going in the right way, or any apparent means of getting back up to the higher platforms if necessary. Also, certain enemies acted as if they were aware of you. You had to jump down and would stand at the edge of a lower platform, waiting for you. When this happened, I would have to walk back and wait until the monster would leave. As I went on, I came across platforms stacked above each other with a little space in between, looking like a maze. This maze that I couldn't jump, and it made escape from enemies difficult. Thankfully, the only enemies able to fit through these mazes were the 4-legged beasts seen at the beginning of the level. Adding to the difficulty were long, tapeworm-esque monsters that would rise themselves up in between the platforms and trap you. The only attack they responded to was the heat beam, which would cause them to shrink back down. But this was costing even more power, and I couldn't afford to do without the heat beam for long. While trying to avoid the abominations that were in this level, I found out that if you stand idle in one place for too long, the ground tries to absorb your monster. I think it was about 4 minutes before in the end that this level was making me physically sick. The tension was getting to me, and having to take in all these disgusting sights made me want to puke. I nearly did pause the game and look for a bag, but I was able to hold it together. I also found a trick at the end of the level, though it was too late for me to do any real good. If 2 different species of monsters tried to run into each other face to face, they would fight each other and leave me alone. I didn't intentionally cause this, it just happened. Finally, at the end, it was time for another boss fight. It was certainly ugly, but not quite as horrific as I feared it would be. But more importantly than dealing with its appearance was defeating it. And since I had less than half my health bar to start with, there was no room for errors. It was attached to the floor when I first saw it, but after 10 hits, it detached from the floor and began floating. It moved fast, and unlike the Bloodlegs boss, he wasn't impeded by any sort of gravity. It was even able to fly through the ground without any collision effects. It used this to its advantage and would float beneath the ground and spring up randomly to bite at you. But it stopped doing this after a few well-aimed kicks to the face. The pink area on its upper jaw was a weak point. Too many hits there would cause it to spasm uncontrollably. The new strategy was to rapidly float up down while moving back and forth across the stage, trying to constantly keep its jaws and aim towards me. Health was getting critical at this point, and it spammed the heat beam from which it had no defense. In the last stretch of the battle, the monster had lost its mind, rapidly rushing back and forth and gnashing its jaws. I had to duck under it and then strike when its back was turned. 20 more hits and it was destroyed. One last level to go. And then it was down to one last level. I didn't hesitate. I selected Solomon and entered. Perhaps a little too fast. This last level was definitely the peak of disconnect between what the NES was roughly capable of and what this game could create. The music also caught my attention. It was one of the only songs that appeared more than once. The horrible screeching from when the hell beast appeared in the graveyard. As soon as I started, there was already an enemy prepared to attack, a centaur wielding a whip, and it wasn't alone. When I started fighting, several more centaurs appeared, coming from both sides at the screen at the same time. It was too much to handle. Solomon's flight saved me from taking too much damage at the start of the level. The centaurs followed after, but seemed to be unable to jump. After escaping the creatures, I noticed gaps in the ground. While trying to avoid the jumping sword and mouth-hit enemies in mid-fight, I got close to the surface of the lava, and a creature emerged and tried to grab me. It didn't succeed, but I was startled. Careful maneuvering would be needed to avoid instant death here. As new enemies appeared, the level soon became very difficult. A lot of the trouble came from stalking red demons that stood on top of tall, narrow mountains and spewed fire. I got by them by waiting till their back was turned and hitting them with a flying kick, which made them fall into the lava. It was at this time I noticed that I wasn't gaining any health from killing enemies. Not all the ground was stable. At one point, the ground was reduced to small chunks that only slowly drifted towards the right. Some of them would sink into the lava upon landing on them, and there was no way to tell which ones would sink and which one would not. Being so close to the lava added to the threat of the lava creatures, and this was very frustrating. I was also feeling very hot, which made me concentrating hard. If you've ever had a heat rush, it feels similar to that. I had periodically stopped for water because of it. This was almost certainly due to the game and not my imagination, but I kept pushing the thought out of my mind. I didn't want to think about it. At the end of the stage, I encountered a boss rising from the lava. Its arrival noted with a ungodly howling growl. When it walked onto the land, I saw how gigantic it was, several times the size of Solomon. I was about to fly up and attack it when it opened its mouth and let out a huge blast of fire. I had to fly to dodge the flames and then get close enough to the boss to fire a heat beam at its face, causing it to stumble backwards. If it didn't stumble backwards, it would have kept moving left until it forced Solomon into the lava, as there was no more ground within reach. The beast had to wait between uses of its fire breath, as it seemed to cost a great deal of energy. I used this time to attack it, but fire wasn't its only weapon, and I had to worry of the monster swatting at me with its clawed hands. As its health decreased, it moved faster, and the battle felt like a tug of war between the two monsters over this bridge of land. After about 40 hits, it was defeated, tumbling backwards into the lava from whence it came. And then the final stage had been completed. At last, it was down to two bosses and a final encounter with the Hell Beast. For some reason, I thought Ghidorah would be easier to beat, so I confronted him first. The classic Ghidorah battle music from the original started up as I was faced against the new King Ghidorah. King Ghidorah was as powerful and unrelenting as ever. He instantly lashed out with gravity beams, which were more damaging than Godzilla's hate beam. It became a struggle of constantly beating Ghidorah at every opportunity to keep him from using the attack. But Ghidorah soon saw through my tactic and started using physical attacks as well. He would strike with each of its necks, knocking me backwards and making it impossible to get close enough to punch him. But I had an idea. To wait for him to lunge with one of its heads and immediately blast it with the heat beam. It worked, and to my surprise, the heat beam had actually obliterated Ghidorah's middle head. It was only a few seconds before I realized what this would lead to, and sure enough, King Ghidorah was using the power of the glitch to transform into Mecha King Ghidorah. But what really shocked me was the sudden change in music. I had heard it before, but it wasn't from the original NES game. It was from the Super Godzilla during the Mecha King Ghidorah fight. Mecha King Ghidorah's first attack was its most deadly, the Machine Hand. Very similar to Gigan's Saw, it immobilizes the monster and rapidly drains the health bar. Fortunately, before Ghidorah could do a lot of damage, the timer ran out. I would need to defeat Mecha King Ghidorah quickly to prevent him from using the Machine Hand. So I said Solomon to fight him. The two monsters were even matched in strength. But Solomon was faster, and by slashing and heat beaming without pause, the cyborg monster soon met its end. With Ghidorah defeated, I was returned to the board. I now outnumbered the enemy by 4 monsters to 1, and victory seemed to be soon at hand. The base icon had changed to a blood red color. I could feel hatred emanating from it. I started a fight against this destroyer with Anguirus. The music was the same as Ghidorah's. When the fight began, the destroyer was in microscopic form. After one hit, it changed into Juvenile, which had few attacks and was also dealt with easily. The fight became serious once the destroyer entered the aggregate form, gaining the use of large arms and the micro-oxygen beam. Anguirus' raw attack, which had been very useful up until now, was rendered useless by the destroyer constantly attacking me with its large arms when I tried to use it. For this part of the fight, I had to rely on brute strength. Just before the time ran out, the destroyer had changed into his flying form, which Anguirus was ill-suited to fight against. Going back in, I fought against a flying form with Mothra, which seemed fitting. Mothra was weaker than Anguirus, but was much better equipped to dodge and counter flying destroyer's attacks, so the fight was in my favor. However, the Mecha Ghidorah fight music started playing and Destroyer changed into its final form sooner than expected, which drastically turned the tables. Mothra's attacks were doing very little to the Destroyer, and I had to move furiously to avoid damage while waiting for the timer to run out. Even though it would be near impossible to beat Destroyer with Mothra, I still had 3 other monsters. Final Form Destroyer was very resistant to taking damage, and the heavily armored foe would not be defeated without a long fight. In the last part of the fight, I wasn't using much strategy, just attacking brutally and as fast as I could. On its last bar of health, Destroyer tried one last counterattack. A beam of energy from its chest. I don't know how powerful it would have been, because just before it could fire, I punched Destroyer in the chest cavity, destroying him. And then that was it. The last kaiju boss was gone. In the midst of all the excitement, I had briefly forgotten that there was still one last thing to do before the game would be over. Seeing the icon again hit me like a ton of bricks, and I froze for a few minutes. I had come so far to get to this point, but I was terrified. I really did not want to know what this last encounter was going to be like. Before I could let myself think about it any longer, I moved Godzilla over and began the stage. You're here now. This is the end. Just one last thing, and then it's all over. And when the screen changed, there was nothing. Just Godzilla and a black screen. I walked back and forward, fired a heat beam. Nothing happened until I heard something. The faint sound of a familiar drum beat. Oh dear God. That was my first thought on realize I would have to fight Red the creature that tormented me through nearly the whole game. How would I be able to fight something that can kill with one touch? It seemed totally impossible. Thankfully, Red was no longer able to deliver one-hit kills, but despite that, this was still the most difficult battle I've ever faced, in this game or otherwise. If I had any real comprehension of what I was getting into before I started the fight, I would have never done it. I very soon learned what a horrible mistake I had made. Red reached out and clawed at Godzilla, and when his claws cut through him, I felt it. I know that it's common for people to cringe up when their video game character gets hit or loses a life, but this was not that. This was genuine, physical pain. When the pain struck me, I paused the game. I hadn't suffered any actual injuries, but I felt just like my shoulder had been clawed through. I had seen and experienced many unpleasant things at this point, but the game causing me real pain was where I drew the line. Yes, I would be disappointed that I wouldn't get to see the ending, but the risk was no longer worth it. I was about to get up and take one last screenshot and turn off the NES when I realized something else. I couldn't get up. I was paralyzed in my seat. The only muscles I could move were my fingers and thumbs. As the terror set in, a new message appeared on the screen.
You're not leaving.
I started to scream, but only a weak, choking sound was coming out. I desperately tried to get my body to move, but I did nothing. I was looking every direction, and then I looked over at the computer. Somehow the computer was taking screenshots of the game on its own when I began the fight. I still don't know how or why. Something in the game must have been causing it. Since Red could hear what I was saying, I tried begging for him to let me go. From here, things started to get hazy as I was under extreme stress at the time, but from what I can remember, I said, I'm sorry I insulted you. I didn't mean it. I didn't know things would get this serious. Please, just let me go. If you let me go, I promise I will never tell anyone or turn the game on ever again. Please! And Red replied,
You pathetic one. It's too late now. Only one will survive.
the statement could not be any more clear. If I couldn't kill Red, then he would kill me! Like an idiot, I played around with something I didn't understand, and now it might cost me my life. I stopped struggling to move and accepted the reality of the situation. There was only one way to get out of this alive. I had to kill Red. It all went by so fast. If it weren't for the screenshot, I might not have remembered any of this. Just like in the chase levels, Red moved at a horrifyingly fast speed. There was barely enough time to process a thought. And thus, there was no time to form a strategy. I had to rely solely on my wits and reflexes. To make things worse, there was no way to predict what kind of attacks Red might use, so I constantly had to be on the offense and defense. I felt every hit that Godzilla took. They all hurt. I tried so hard to avoid the damage, but every attack that I dodged left me vulnerable to another. And the pain would only get worse. After he jumped over me, Red's eyes started to glow. I moved as far back as I could and ducked, but there was no dodging this one. When this hit me, I really did scream. I screamed so loud that someone else in the apartment should have heard me, but they didn't. Just looking at the image hurt me, making me remember the incinerating burn. I paused the game because it hurt so bad, but pressed unpause the game to attack me again, which made me furious. I immediately counterattacked with the heat beam, again and again, until the power meter was totally diminished. I wanted to Red to hurt like I did. Just before the timer ran out, Red transitioned into swimming form. I didn't think the timer would still be affecting a battle like this. I'm thankful for it because it gave me a few minutes to collect my thoughts and decide what to do next. I chose to fight Red's next two forms with the monsters I encountered them with, so Anguirus was next. It probably wasn't all that smart of an idea, but it's what I did. I jumped up and hit beamed Red in the face, and he moved off screen where I couldn't reach him. Then a wave of large mines started to fall from above. I felt this was unfair, so I shouted, "If you're going to cheat, then why do you even let me use the controller?"
Can't break the rules.
and then he came at me, rushing from the top left of the screen downwards. Damn it! Now I wouldn't even be able to see where his next step was coming from. Red continued to strike from random angles. I constantly moved to spawn around him. Another 40 seconds went by and Gears was nearly gone, but together we had forced Red into his flying form, so it was Mothra's turn next. Deciding to fight Red with Mothra was a terrible idea. Mothra was instantly overwhelmed by Red, and the life meter was devastated in a mere 15 seconds. And once Mothra's life was down to 2 bars, Red did something I didn't see coming. He reached out, grabbed Mothra, and ate her. After Mothra was devoured, I felt an agonizing pain like being crushed to death. Mothra had been killed for my stupidity, and I would share that pain. It was a short tradition from the Battle of the Board, but it felt like an hour. The pain, combined with being unable to move, was driving me insane. I wanted so badly for this to end. I never wanted anything so much. But I still had hope. There was only one monster left that could be brought to full health by engaging Red in battle. Solomon. If any of them had a chance to save my life now, it would be him. Solomon apparently has some history with Red, as when the fight started, this dialogue happened.
Traitor, I always hated you. You could die like the rest. I'd rather die than serve you.
Red took me by surprise again by immediately burning me with his demonic fire a second time. As much as it hurt, it actually worked to my advantage, since Solomon started at full life. He still had some to spare, but now Red had used up all his energy and could not use his ultimate weapon any longer. Now he would die. As he drew close to the end of his life bar, Red turned his whole body to face the screen and flew upwards, then slamming back down in an attempt to crush Solomon. When that failed to work, he tried to devour Solomon like he had Mothra, but he wouldn't be eating my monster this time. I thought I had won, but something was wrong. Red wasn't sinking to the bottom, and I still couldn't move. Red was still alive.
I'm not done with you.
After his seeming defeat by Solomon, Red had reconstructed his body into his gigantic final form, transporting us to a blazing inferno in the process. It was reminiscent of our first encounter, except now the scenery, much like the true power of Red, had become very real. The music had erupted into a loud blaring sound, a furious drum of death. Faced against Red's insane amount of health, my own demise was imminent. Solomon was my strongest monster, but not even he stood a chance. It was like trying to find a mountain. Within seconds, Solomon was overpowered and dropped to the floor, when Red crushed him to death underneath his foot. The sadistic monster took his time as he snapped Solomon's vertebrae and ribs like dry, brittle twigs. I could tell he was enjoying our pain.
You are weak. Your monsters are weak. You will all die.
This is hopeless. I'm a dead man. I had no choice but to send another monster to its death. We were all going to die. I only hoped they would forgive me. After decreasing Red's health by a minuscule amount, Anguirus was only obliterated. Red unleashed a hail of blazing hot needles into his face until he collapsed. Another moment of unspeakable agony, then nothingness as my ally faded away.
You can win, Zachary.
I asked Red how he knew my name, and then he said it.
I've known you for a long time. I'll tell you a secret. I killed Melissa.
For years, she was being tortured by something nobody understood. Now I knew what it was. Now I understood why I was mocked about Melissa's death, and how the game knew about it, because he knew about it, because he was the one responsible, and this time, he was going to kill me.
send your last monster, I will end this futile struggle.
I was taken back to the board to send Godzilla to his final stand. Barely anything was left of the board, just Godzilla and Red's icons, and the fifth monster. In the midst of everything that was happening, I had completely forgotten about it. I tried yet again to select it. I cursed, I begged, I screamed at it to do something, anything to help me. To no avail. There was only one thing to do. I knew Godzilla didn't stand any more of a chance than the rest did. But maybe now that all the other monsters were gone, the fifth monster might finally awaken. I managed to get the creature's icon selected and then pressed the A button as fast as I could. The icon started to shake as if it were trying to desperately to move. It was then that Red decided he was done playing fair, and before I could deactivate the monster, he went for the killing blow, paralyzing my heart. My head started to become numb and unfeeling, but even as my vision was fading away, I still tried to press the A button. Red surely was breaking one of his rules, but he must have thought that if he could kill me quickly, then it would be too late for any consequences to matter. He would have won. He was wrong. Red's power was being challenged by another force. It prevented him from killing me, and when I regained my vision, I saw a familiar sight. Zach, you're in my shine. Who are you? You already know me. I'm Melissa. What? How is this possible? Red told me that he killed you. It's true. Even after that, he tortured me. If you can't stop him, he'll do the same to you. But how will I be able to stop him now? I can't find Red, but there's one who can. I will release him from Red's grasp. Don't give up. I love you. Her words stirred something inside of me. I wasn't going to die like this, and I had more to fight for than just my own life. I had to fight to save Melissa and the world she inhabits. With her help, the fifth monster was finally unleashed. Acacias, the golden light. It was time to end this once and for all. Together, we would take this damned hellspawn out of existence.
They can't save you.
Acacias was by far the strongest playable monster in the game. He had to be, if we were to have any chance of surviving. His punch involved turning his hands into blades which caused tremendous damage, but Red had more than enough life to spare. In the end, this would come down to pure skill. With one final strike, Red was destroyed. His body disintegrated and sank below, accompanied by a sort of triumphant music. Slowly, the paralysis wore off, and I was able to stand up again. We had done it. Melissa's death had been avenged, and I felt overwhelming happiness until I remembered all the death and pain that led up to this point, all the other monsters who had fought and died. I was about to mourn them, but the game had yet to conclude. Tears of joy streamed down my face, and I broke out crying. I cried harder than I have in several years, maybe in whole life. All I had been through, all I had discovered, and now the game was coming to an end. But before she and the others left, Melissa had something to tell me. You saved us. We are forever grateful. We'll be together again, someday. And that was it. Man, That was such a long creepypasta reading, honestly. This was probably the longest I have ever done in my entire life up until now. Whew, but okay, it's done. It's over. If you want to read the creepypasta by yourselves, the link will be in the description down below. But yeah, that was it. If you enjoyed the creepypasta reading, then please make sure to hit the like button and hit the subscribe button. And also turn on notifications to get notified when a new video drops, because oh my god, I've put such a ton of effort up until now. Also, just a reminder, I don't know when this video will be uploaded. Maybe almost at the end of October, because the next video might be the Halloween livestream that I will do on the 31st of October. Maybe midnight, who knows? But we'll see. Maybe this will be the last video before the livestream, but we'll see what happens. Anyways, that was the creepypasta from me. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye!